So today, I want to talk to you guys about AR-15s or rifles. In the last video, we covered concealed carry and what I would recommend for somebody who doesn't have any guns at all, who's planning on concealed carrying, that sort of thing. For today's video, I'm going to talk about rifles. So who would I recommend a rifle for? Well, in my world, really everybody should have a rifle. Everybody should have some sort of main or a primary type gun, and to me, that's going to be some sort of rifle system. We're going to talk specifically about the AR-15. The AR-15 is one of the most proven, popular, widely used guns in the US at this point. It's extremely durable, very, very reliable, and very accurate, as well as being very versatile and modular. We're going to go ahead and dive into it. We're going to talk about my gun, which is this guy right here. We're going to talk about this one today. And why I recommend something like this. So if you've already got your concealed carry gun, or you're not going to conceal carry and you're going to be, keeping a gun at home or in your car or something like that, I definitely recommend going the rifle route. It's a far more effective platform than something like a handgun. So we'll talk a little bit about mine here and kind of go through it. So hopefully you guys get some ideas from that on what you might want to get and how to set it up. So first, we'll talk about brands. There's a lot of really good brands out there. This one's a BCM. Daniel Defense is another good one that is pretty reasonably priced, but there's a ton of really good ones out there, and they go all the way from about $1,600 bucks all the way up to $3,000. But Sons of Liberty Gunworks, Radian, Triarch, Knights Armament, all really good brands. I would stay away from a lot of the cheaper stuff. Just from working in the gun industry, I can tell you there's a lot of kind of not so ethical stuff that goes on in the industry, and I would shy away from the cheaper materials or cheaper products. Those are kind of my recommendations for what to go with. As far as barrel length, this is one of the biggest questions I got from working at a gun store, and in order for me to explain this, there's a lot of kind of factors that go into play. So setting up a gun and selecting a gun like barrel length is gonna your mission is going to dictate how you set it up, or your goal or what you want to do with it is going to dictate how you set it up. And a lot of people, what they ask me, follow up to that is, well, I want a good general purpose do-all gun. And my question to them is, what does do-all mean to you? Does that mean competition? Does that mean hunting elk with it? Does that mean introducing new shooters? Or do you just want something that, for a variety of personal defense situations, you want it to be capable of the most types of missions, the most common ones that you're likely to come across. So for me, that's what it means. That being said, we have to take a few things into consideration. First off, your experience and your environment, as well as your resources, as well as any team you might have that you're, whether it's some neighbors or something like that, or you're in law enforcement and you have some partners or something, or are you by yourself, those sort of things. We also have to take into consideration statistics, and realistically, what are you going to come across? Realistically, if you're put into a situation, what's it going to be? And of course, we can't predict what's going to happen because anything can happen, but we can look at certain patterns and see what are we more likely to come across. So for example, in the US, the average distance for a SWAT sniper is around 60 yards. The average shooting for a police officer to get into is about 5 yards distance from the bad guy. For a civilian, it's well under 25 yards still. It's very close range. It's still probably in the 3 to 7 yard range. So that's what we got to kind of consider. The longest rifle shot ever taken from law enforcement from something like an AR-15 is still well under 200 yards. So we're dealing with CQB. Pretty much every shooting has been a CQB related shooting in the US, and that's something we have to take into account. We're not getting in gunfights at 800 yards with another fire team, that has RPGs and machine guns. That's just not happening here, at least not as of right now. So what are we preparing for with a general purpose gun? Well, with that data, to me, that means a general purpose gun is going to be a CQB gun. It's going to be a close quarters gun. So something that is very capable at close quarters, working in and around vehicles and buildings. That's my experience in law enforcement. I was always in and around vehicles and buildings, and the farthest distance I can remember being me to bad guy where I was addressing an armed person that I actually had eyes on was about 7 yards. So not terribly far. I'm not concerned with 400-yard shots here, really. It's still a good capability to have and a good skill to have, but it's not my main concern. And I'm going to set up for what I'm likely to come across, mainly, that is. So that said, that's why you see here I've got an AR pistol with an 11.5-inch barrel. And by the way, this is a Criterion Core series barrel. So the reason I have this one is because it's still very short. I can maneuver it very easily in and around buildings and vehicles, but it's still capable to a much farther distance. So this kind of gets into the ammunition debate on what type of ammo you're going to run in your gun. But when I was first introduced to SBRs, when I first got into law enforcement, I was issued a 10-3, I believe. Colt Commando was like a Mark 18 Motto or something like that. But basically, I was told that gun is only good for 100 yards. Well, that's not really true. It was a half-truth. The ammunition we were using only performed the way they wanted it to out to 100 yards, but it was still lethal past that. And if you're using different types of ammunition, you can extend that range depending on what your goal is with your ammunition. They wanted a barrier blind round that expanded to a certain amount first, and it still expanded and still penetrated past 100 yards, but it didn't expand quite as much as they wanted it to. It didn't get its full expansion. So that's why they said it's only good for 100. It wasn't really true that it was only good for 100. With this type of gun right here, I'm using 77 grain 5.56 ammo. And when I did my testing at about 1,000 feet of elevation, I was getting about 450 yards of adequate lethality. So this is another thing, and it's important to define these things. Lethality, what does that mean to you? To me, if the rifle, if the round is still hitting harder and faster than my pistol at point blank, then that means to me that it's adequately lethal still. So I don't drop below the velocity and energy of a 9mm until a 9mm at point blank until I hit 450 yards with this gun. That was at about 1,000 feet of elevation. I'm at almost 8,000 feet now up in the mountains. So I would say this is probably closer to about 500 yards. So considering most shootings are well under 50 yards, 500 yards is 10 times the capability I really need in this small package right here. So let's go through the features I've got on the gun. One of the first things you notice up front is I've got a suppressor on it. And you'll notice it's the Surefire Mini RC. This guy right here does not have the same suppression as its bigger brother, the regular standard RC or the RC2, but it takes a lot of the flash out, takes a lot of the concussive force out. It does reduce some of the sound signature, but overall signature reduction on this guy while keeping it short, I think is accomplished by having the mini can on something like this 11.5. I'm not necessarily going to reduce decibels because even the full-size can is only hearing safe once a day. So as soon as you fire that second round, it's no longer hearing safe. And to a bad guy at any kind of distance or even at closer range, it really doesn't make a difference to them. So there's been some testing on that, especially at 50, 100, and 200 yards, what the a suppressed gun sounds like, and the crack of the round is so loud that it doesn't matter if you have this suppressor or the other suppressor on it or no suppressor. The crack of the round is so loud that you still get very high decibels at those distances. So I'm not really concerned with that. I'm more concerned with signature reduction, and that's why I run a mini on this guy. And that keeps it nice and short still. So this is 16 inches right at the tip of the muzzle, and that to me is perfect for CQB. That's about the longest I would want to go for CQB type stuff personally. A good flashlight. So this right here is the Surefire dual fuel. This light right here I would highly recommend. You can either run CR123s or the rechargeable 18650 with it. I think 18650s that are rechargeable are the way of the future. There's a lot of benefits to running those over something like the CR123s. People say, oh, well, where am I going to find 18650s if my battery dies? Well, you don't need to find a battery. You just need to find electricity to recharge this one and maybe carry a spare with you, like you already carry spare CR123s. So carry a spare or two with you, carry a charger and a solar charger and the charger for this, and you can charge this thing in the field. So that's kind of my argument with that. The biggest downside people say with this light is it's not as, it doesn't have as much candela, so it doesn't throw as much, but it's got a lot of lumens and it's a very floody beam. Again, going back to our purposes, our distances we're dealing with, and in and around vehicles and buildings, I want to light up as much as I can in a shorter area, out to about 100 yards. So that's me personally. So that's why I run this light. I think it's perfect for that, perfect for clearing buildings, perfect for clearing vehicles and things like that, or operating in and around those areas, because it gives me the biggest field of view, if you would, at nighttime. It's got a very, very wide spill. And eventually I will have this on a T-Rex Arms light bar mount. They've just been out of stock for the M-Lock ones. When I had the key mod, the KMR rail on this, I had it out even with the suppressor. That way I don't get any suppressor shadow or anything like that. Again, primarily for CQB type stuff, I want as large field of view from the beam as I can possibly get. On top here, this is full power PEC 15. If you're considering running night vision in the future, which is the way to go for nighttime operations, it's the best way and the safest way to operate at nighttime, I would definitely recommend something like this PEC 15. They have a civilian version, brand new. They run like $1,300. If you want the best laser out there, in my opinion, is probably the BE Myers Mall, although it's heavier than this, and it's about at least twice as much money as the regular civilian version of this. But these ones you can buy used on different places for like $1,600 to $2,000, depending on the condition. If you notice, I run a pressure pad for the light, and then I just run the button for the laser. That's how I prefer. I don't like to have the push button on the back of the light. To me, I have to break my grip too much in order to press that, and I just don't like it. If I don't have a laser, the only time I'll run a push button is in kind of like the 1 o'clock position. I'll move my thumb over the rail and press the light that way. I won't ever have it on the same side just because I have to break my grip too much on the gun. Unless you had some sort of vertical grip, which I don't like using, then that might be beneficial. Like one of those BCM short angled ones would be good on this one, but I personally don't like them. So moving on back, optics. There's probably 3, I would say, main styles of optics you can put on a gun like this. You can go with a simple red dot or holographic sight. I kind of mesh those two together. Some sort of no magnification illuminated optic that's designed for speed and to be parallax free, which none of them really truly are 100%. Or you can run a red dot with a magnifier. The magnifier will get you a little bit more distance, more detail, information, stuff like that, because you get a little bit of magnification with it, but it doesn't add anything to the reticle as far as data gathering, so there's no milling or BDC or anything like that. Most times, for EOTech, I think there is a BDC reticle in a couple of their optics, but most times there's not, and you end up with eye relief issues. It's usually pretty short eye relief on the magnifiers, and then obviously added weight. Or you can run something like an LPVO, or a low power variable scope, variable optic, and it's usually like a 1 to 4, 1 to 6, 1 to 8, or 1 to 10, or something like that, and you could slap something like that on here. That adds a lot of bulk, a lot of weight to it, but it adds a huge amount of capability, so you are able to zoom in up to 6 power or greater, as we've seen as of recent, and you're still able to burn through targets up close at 1x, especially if you've got an optic with a really good 1x. Like the Vortex Razor 1 to 6 is probably one of the best 1 to 6 optics out there. It's the one I run on one of my other guns. So those are kind of the 3 different categories, and they each kind of have pros and cons. The most versatile, in my opinion, is probably the LPVO. I've used magnifiers with EOTechs and with Aimpoints before. I'm not a huge fan. For this particular gun, again, the distances were concerned with what's my goal and things like that. I want something lightweight, durable, small, something I can shoot passively with night vision as well. So this right here is an Aimpoint H1. It's not their T series, so it's not designed with the night vision settings, but on setting 1, this is actually very, very usable. and it's very clear looking through this passively. I've actually had better experience with this than some other branded optics that are designed for night vision capability. I think this one performs better. So if you have an H1 or an H2, I think you're probably just as good as the T series, to be honest with you. If you're not sure which one to get and you're going to be running night vision, I definitely would recommend getting the T series for that added benefit of more options for nighttime. But you can definitely make the H series work. And this is on a Knights Armament high-rise mount. They're nicknamed the Skyscraper mount. I personally like having my optic basically as high as possible. This one gets it to about a 2.3 inches above the rail here, which I think is awesome. One, my head in position without having to really move all that much, so I don't have to like hunch my head down or anything like that to get behind this gun. I can just simply present the gun and the dot is right in my field of view without having to tilt my head or lean it over or anything like that. So I can truly bring the optic to my head. So it saves me from neck strain and things like that. Where this really shines is when you're wearing other gear. So helmets and plate carriers, and especially if you're running night vision, being able to bring this up and shoot passively through this. So that means looking with my night vision through this optic instead of using a laser and pushing out infrared energy. I can just bring this up and have the dot in front of my eye and then shoot at the target without putting anything out. Or if you're under night vision shooting with a laser and now I'm going to go to white light, I can tilt my head up, look under my nods, and bring this up, and the optic is high enough that I don't have to do much motion to get this optic up into my eye line again, so that I can use it with white light. So there's a lot of benefits to running a higher optic. One of the downsides is height over bore, so you have to take that into account at closer ranges. And basically what that means is mechanically the barrel is down here and the optic is up here. So within about 10 yards, I have to account for the distance between these 2 points when I want to hit something. So I have to aim high by about 3.5 inches, especially up close, in order to actually hit what I'm aiming at. So that's height over bore. So that is something to take into account, but this is much, much more comfortable for me than really any lower optic. 193 is about the lowest I will go. So if you are kind of looking at what to get, I would say between 193 and 2.3 is perfect. So yeah, back here in the main gun, everything's pretty much stock for the most part. I do have a couple things that I added to it. The Geisley charging handle does a really good job mitigating gas because I used a suppressor. There's gas coming back into the system here much more, and this does a pretty good job at blocking that. There's a Geisley trigger in this, and I think that's pretty much it there. I'm using an H3 buffer in here because the barrel is so short, and I'm using a suppressor. You get a lot of these pressures back. That helps tame the recoil. And then I'm using an SBA4 brace. This one's an adjustable brace, so it moves back and forth on the buffer tube here. I've got a soft T wide tourniquet inside it, and then I've got my Ferro Concept Slingster sling on it. So if you're just getting into it and you don't have any of this stuff yet, the first thing I would probably get is a good flashlight and then a good optic. Those are the first two things I would get. And then from there, I would go with things like a sling. I'll probably slap a tourniquet on there next. Tourniquets aren't very expensive, and I usually like to keep one on my gun if I can. Yeah, that way I just always have it available. So if this is leaned up next to my bed and I grab this, it's ready to go. So that's kind of my gun. That's why I have it set up the way I do, and all the things that I put on it. And I try to keep it as streamlined, lightweight, and simple. I know that looks like a lot of stuff, but trying to keep it lightweight, simple, and streamlined so it has the most capability without other junk weighing me down. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about a different rifle I have. I think there's basically two styles of setting up guns. A CQB gun like this, which is what I would consider a general purpose gun, and then something like a recce rifle that has that low power variable optic, which you could do to this gun by simply putting a 1:6 on it, and then you kind of have a recce rifle there. So I think those are kind of the two different styles there, and somewhere between 11.5 inches and 14.5 to me is the sweet spot on you know, what length to get one of these guns. 16 inches, if you want the most velocity and the flattest shooting gun, 16 is about as long as I would go. Especially if you're analyzing velocities, you you start to lose as you add more length onto that barrel. Your increase is much smaller after 16 inches. Once you go shorter, the shortest I would possibly go is about 10.3, but even for me, 10.3 is almost too short because there is a big bump in velocity going to 11.5. 11.5 to 12.5, there's a smaller bump. 12.5 to 13.7, there's a bigger bump. And then 13.7 to 14.5, they're all relatively the same velocity in there. There's very, very small increments. But those are kind of the common barrel lengths out there. So find what works for you. Hopefully this gives you guys some ideas. If you guys have any other questions, please let me know. With that, stay safe and God bless.